Good morning. I love working with children. So for today's sermon, I will introduce you to some amazing characters through the eyes of a young girl. First, however, a little background to the narrative. Let's turn together to that introduction that was read for us to the book of Exodus. This introduction really paints a picture of the larger narrative for the whole book of Exodus. Exodus recounts a history of Israel's religious tradition, really highlighting two root experiences. The first root is that God frees this band of slaves. The second root is that God makes this band of slaves, these people, into a community in covenant with their freeing God. And the overarching character is Moses. I heard it. Heard of him before? Perhaps. His is really a hero journey of sorts. Think of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Annie the Orphan, Oliver Twist, the list goes on. While Moses is the overarching character of the story, there are others in the shadows who make his journey possible. So first, the context. The text opens with a list of names of the sons of Israel. These sons were not initially enslaved in Egypt, however. While the total number of people born to Jacob, the text says, was 70, quote, the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. That's a lot of babies being born who need to be delivered. That's a lot of medical professionals needed, nurseries, children's summer camps. But the context into which they were born became unwelcoming from the Pharaoh of the time. The conflict in the Exodus story is really laid out in a few short lines that I'll paraphrase here. The Pharaoh feels threatened by the prolific baby-producing people. He's scared they will turn on him and go to war with him, and win. Therefore, he made them slaves. But, I love buts, that didn't sound right for a sermon. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. In other words, conceived and delivered babies. And the more they spread, again, more babies, the more the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. And the response? Well, the text says the Egyptians became, I quote, ruthless, imposing, made their lives bitter with harsh service, ruthless, imposing, repeated again. So, if you were the Pharaoh, if you were feeling threatened militarily, politically, and you wanted to let the people know who was boss, who would you talk to? The general? The House of Representatives? Well, the story zooms in on a conversation that you already have a little spoiler alert from earlier, between the ruling Pharaoh and a group of healthcare professionals. Our story today highlights these professionals. I said earlier that I love children. I also love writing children's stories. One of my very favorite authors, a rabbi, I think she was the first female rabbi in America, she says, and I quote, "But mountains and ladders with angels coming up and down doesn't really find a resting place in my woman's soul," end of quote. Somewhere in my journey, I began to also bring my experiences as a woman to the biblical text. When I thought of communion, I would feel my hands in dough or think about a lifeblood in the cup. Mary was one of my inspirations. She's the bearer of God, the God bearer. Miriam, she is the leader of the very first guild recorded in scriptures. She was a leader of a guild of tambourine players. Who knew? And they really played a strategic role in the celebration when the Israelites crossed over the river on the dry land to the other side, and she pulls out her tambourine with the other ladies who are a part of that guild and celebrates that they crossed into freedom. So I began writing children's stories from the lenses of women who didn't get much airtime in scriptures. I imagined into their stories to find a personal connection and connections, I believe, to the broader people of faith too. So sit back. I didn't bring any popcorn, but I'm going to read a story that I wrote. This is told through the eyes of Miriam, Moses' older sister. Miriam was an average girl. Average, that is, until two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, taught her the birthing song. It was a song unlike any other she had heard. When Shiphrah and Puah started to sing, it began deep within their tummies and seemed to rise up like a flying eagle. While Miriam didn't understand the depth of this song, she somehow seemed to grow an inch each time she tapped out its rhythm and sang its tune. It went kind of like this. New life's a-comin', yes, I know. Eyes fixed on Yahweh through the pain. Oh, sister, new life's a-comin', sister strong. For I know Yahweh will be with us today, us today. New life's a-comin', yes, I know. Eyes fixed on Yahweh through the pain. Oh, sister, new life's a-comin', sister strong. For I know Yahweh will be with us today, us today. Miriam's tambourine always hung on her hip, and in the cool evenings she found herself tapping out the rhythm of the song to serenade the grasshoppers and crickets. Miriam loved spending time with Shiphrah and Puah. Their sparkling eyes seemed to see right into her, but not in a way that made her squirm. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that made her want to softly tap on her tambourine. As a Hebrew slave, Miriam's life was already tough, since the men in her household were out working for the Egyptians all day and into the night, and her mother and her were responsible for all the chores at home. But even with all the hard work, she slowly discovered that her heart began to beat to a different tune. She dreamt of a day when she would be as free and powerful as an eagle, soaring the heights and swooping down on the Nile and the lands beyond. Then, overnight, Miriam's already difficult world turned upside down. A new Pharaoh came into power, and it turned out he did not like Miriam's people, not even a stitch. He did not want them to have so many babies. He wanted to weaken them, keeping their numbers small so he would never feel threatened by them. So he made them work harder than ever, with big bosses at every work site making bigger demands on them. More mortar, more bricks, never enough. And so Miriam's work at home also doubled. But the funny thing was that even with all this new work, the women were somehow stronger. Shiphrah and Puah could hardly keep up with delivering all the babies. They even called on Miriam to help them from time to time when she wasn't busy with her chores. They taught her how to fetch clean water, sterilize their tools, and cool the women in labor with a cold compress. They taught her of the power to transform childbirth from what might be a negative experience to a positive one. This was all the motivation she needed to work faster than ever, hoping that just maybe tonight there would be a chance for her to help them sing a beautiful baby into the world. One night, after a hard day of chores, Miriam came home exhausted and lay down on her mat. As the night became darker, she overheard Shiphrah and Puah talking with her mother. "What?" cried her mother. "Kill all the baby boys? Let only the girls live?" That night, Miriam learned of the scared Pharaoh's demands placed on Shiphrah and Puah. She also learned that her own mother's swollen belly meant that she was pregnant too. She nervously tapped on her tambourine while trying to hide her sobs. Would she ever hear their birthing songs again? How could Shiphrah and Puah kill all the helpless baby boys they were supposed to deliver into the world? But Miriam had not yet learned the depth of that song. As the days went by, Miriam saw that Shiphrah and Puah somehow grew stronger than ever, almost more tall and confident. How could it be, she wondered? They seemed as powerful and free as the eagle in her dreams. A month later, she learned that they were called right into Pharaoh's presence to give account for why the baby boys were still alive and kicking. When she heard this news, she tapped out a hurried, nervous rhythm on her tambourine for what seemed like days. Finally, they came to Miriam's house to talk with her mother. We looked him straight in the eyes, Shiphrah and Puah proudly shared, and then we made up a story. We told the scared Pharaoh that the Hebrew women were so strong that they delivered their own babies before we were able to get to them. The midwives laughed with her pregnant mother. Some would say they lied. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But Shiphrah and Puah knew that their made-up story would save the lives of hundreds of baby boys. Miriam stood in the shadows, absently tapping on her tambourine. She wondered, would I have the courage someday to tell a lie like Shiphrah and Puah did? She thought not. Well, the Pharaoh felt so threatened and insecure that he went to plan B. He gave up working with Shiphrah and Puah and demanded that his own people, the Egyptians, kill the baby boys as they were born. They were clearly instructed to throw their neighbors' babies, helpless baby boys, into the beloved river, Nile River, poisoning everyone's source of life. When Miriam learned of these awful plans, she couldn't imagine anyone finding pleasure in killing a baby. She wondered, was it heart-wrenching for the Egyptians to carry out Pharaoh's plan too? A day didn't go by without Miriam hearing people weeping who had lost their baby boys. As Miriam spent time with Shiphrah and Puah, she found her bearings again. Her taps on her tambourine slowly grew in confidence and abandon. When the day finally came for her mother to deliver a baby, she found she wasn't quite as scared anymore. Let come what may, she would tap out her song in the face of evil. Shiphrah and Puah joined her mother in the red birthing tent that night. Miriam, of course, was charged with fetching the water, sterilizing the instruments, and keeping cool claws on her mother's forehead. But she was nervous. She couldn't help but tap out the tune along with the singing midwives to keep her hands from shaking. After a long and painful night, Shiphrah and Puah handed a baby to her mother. After a time, her mother called her over. "Miriam, here's your new baby brother. His name is Moses," she said as Miriam held the squirming bundle of life in her hands. Listening to the midwives sing that night, Miriam thought, I think I'm catching up on what makes Shiphrah and Puah so strong. It seems they understand that their song finds its origin in their Yahweh song, a song that birthed both babies and the earth, a song that rang out over all of creation and, in fact, called creation into being. A song so powerful that it could drown out a scared Pharaoh's plans and birth a people as free and powerful as an eagle, soaring the heights and swooping down on the Nile and the lands beyond. Well, that's the end of this part of the story. But if you're like me when you read books, you'll look for any author's notes you can find. I love author's notes. So here are a few of mine today. First note is on midwives. According to Carol Myers, midwives' role was to, quote, empower, facilitate, and support birth. She says it was a mix of instincts, technical knowledge, and clinical skills. Their work was really holistic, emotional and physical support, with the eye of transforming the experience into a positive one, if possible. My next author's note concerns my curiosity of wondering whose baby is it anyways? I woke up in the night a few months ago after saying yes to giving this homily. I went out to the couch to sit a while, readying myself to return to sleep. During this time in the dark, I had a small epiphany for myself. I'm a therapist, thus I love working with kids. What do I have in common with a midwife? The first thought that came to mind is that it's not Shifra and Pua's baby. They help new life enter the world, but the new life is already there. My work as a therapist, sometimes I want to fix problems. I want to rescue others. But I'm like midwives, supporting through the pain and in the hope of transformation and new life. It's the client's work to do the figuring out and to do the living into the healing. My role is to be a supporter of what they need. The next thought that night was the baby in the mom's belly is also not the mom's life or the parent's life. The mom holds the baby until the baby is ready. And delivery is just the beginning of a long life, a long journey, to differentiation, where the baby is becoming his or her own person. And it's the long journey of parents learning to let go. That one's tough for me. Parenting by nature is out of our control at so many turns. While parenting includes pleasure, it also includes so much pain. Also, in this journey, we really don't have control of whether or not we can get pregnant, conceive a new life, or if there will be complications with the delivery, the pregnancy delivery, and then later on complications with our children. That's part of the journey too. The midwives also save the baby boys. As a mother of 3 white males, I often think of what it means for us to support boys in our current culture. That was also another reflection that night. And then I went to sleep. My next author's note concerns lying. Everybody lies. I'm looking at a room full of liars. I love following a therapist, Lisa Dion, and she has a great podcast that I like. And she says, I quote, "Lying is a moving towards our values and or moving away from our challenges. It's a part of that pain-pleasure principle. Lies are a part of our protective pattern. It's really a part of our biology. If we perceive a threat, what am I going to do as a little kid? Lie, because I want more of good and I don't want to be punished. So little kids actually have to learn how to lie as a part of their developmental process, and if they don't, it's a big concern. So for Shifra and Pua, not only were the baby boys' lives at stake, but really the threat was there of the continuation of their people. So what does their lie tell us about them? First, I believe they were passionate about bringing life into the world, not destroying it. Moses was born into a genocide, and of course we know later that Jesus was born into a genocide as well. They're passionate about saving life. Next, I think it tells us that they were so convinced of what they needed to do, even if it meant lying to the Pharaoh, that they lied that their people would be preserved. And this is the first act of civil disobedience recorded in scriptures, and I thought that was fascinating. I did my thesis for my last master's degree on the journey from communist Russia into Poland, Germany, and World War II, and then to lands beyond. And I was amazed over and over and over again as I looked at 4 narratives, 4 memoirs of 4 Mennonites, to see how many acts of civil disobedience there were along the way, how many resilient moves, and so cunning what they did. And we can talk more about that another time. I think the last thing Shifra and Pua's lie tells us is they believed their God was like a midwife too, to empower, facilitate, and support new life. And they joined God in that. My last author's note is on awe. Have you guys seen the movie Inside Out? I love the movie Inside Out. Dasher Keltner is the psychologist who was the consultant for the movie, and I know the second one has just come out, so I am going to see that. He also writes a book called Awe that's really inspiring me these days. He asks, what happens when we witness, quote, other people's courage, kindness, strength, and overcoming? In our case today, what happens if we were moved while you heard this reading of Shifra Mpua's courageous acts of kindness, strength, and resilience? In Keltner's research, he found that several things happen when we are illuminated, inspired by other people's stories. I'm going to share a few of those things that he found. First, we feel an increase in inspiration and optimism and a connectedness to our communities. I think that's pretty cool. Our faith in humanity actually increases. They've done all these cool studies of brain scans and lots of different really fun things and discover that respondents have an increase of a faith in humanity. Can anyone use that nowadays? Maybe a little bit? We also feel a call to better ourselves, often imitating those who have inspired us. And one that I'm really excited about is that our brain responds too. Cortical regions where our emotions translate into ethical action are activated. There's a release of oxytocin and an activation of the vagus nerve, and some people call that part of our nervous system the love nerve. And the love nerve is what connects us to ourselves, and it connects us to others, and I also believe connects us to God. So when we are inspired by other people's action, that part of our nervous system is going ding, 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 yes, yes, more oxytocin, connection within ourselves and in others. One of the signs of that is, have you ever had goosebumps? That's a sign of this happening in your nervous system. Have you ever teared up when someone is sharing their story of pleasure or of pain and their challenge of working through the pain? If you've instantly, spontaneously had tears or goosebumps listening, it's because that's what's happening in your brain right at there and then. These bodily sensations are part of our nervous system, and it's connected with awe. It tells us that we're a part of a community that has commonalities that unite us. Our awakened individual and collective soul can move us to reverence, he says. So there's not time today to read the next section of this story, but it is notable that the young Miriam, after being illuminated by these fearless midwives, also right away does an act of great courage to save her brother who was floating down the Nile in a basket. I wonder today, what might your response be as well?